It was a winter unlike any other. The year was 1941, and the Eastern Front of World War II was becoming a battleground of unimaginable brutality. Among the countless cities swept up in the war's fury, one name stands out like a symbol of endurance and suffering: Leningrad. The siege of this proud Soviet city, lasting for 872 days, would become one of the most horrific episodes in human history, a testament to the resilience of its people and the depths of human suffering in the face of relentless adversity. The story of Leningrad's siege is not just one of military conflict. It is a harrowing narrative of survival against all odds, of humanity pushed to its limits, and of the brutal reality of life in a frozen hell. The siege began on September 8, 1941, when Nazi forces surrounded Leningrad, cutting off all land access to the city. The Germans, under the leadership of Adolf Hitler, sought to capture the city for several reasons: its symbolic importance as a major Soviet industrial and cultural center, its strategic location, and its access to the Baltic Sea. The Nazis had already been advancing deep into Soviet territory, and Leningrad was one of their key targets. What they did not anticipate, however, was the sheer determination and resourcefulness of the people inside the city. They underestimated not only the will to fight, but also the incredible capacity for survival that the citizens of Leningrad would demonstrate over the course of the next 3 years. At the outset of the siege, the city's population was around 3 million. They were caught completely off guard. Leningrad, with its rich history, magnificent architecture, and cultural treasures, had been a symbol of Soviet pride since its founding as St. Petersburg by Tsar Peter the Great in the early 18th century. It had been the capital of the Russian Empire until 1918, and it remained a symbol of the Soviet Union's strength and identity. But as the Germans encircled it, the people inside would be forced into an existence few could have ever imagined. One of the first things the Nazis did was to cut off the city's supply routes, leaving the residents with little to no access to food, medicine, or basic necessities. The German forces were determined to starve the city into submission, hoping that the lack of food and other resources would force the Soviets to surrender. But what they failed to understand was that Leningrad's people were not so easily broken. Life inside the city quickly descended into a nightmare. As food supplies dwindled, the people of Leningrad were forced to find new and unimaginable ways to survive. Bread, the staple of the Soviet diet, became a precious commodity. Rations were reduced to a mere fraction of what was needed to sustain a human being, and people began to starve in large numbers. The government issued ration cards, but they were barely enough to keep the population alive, let alone healthy. A daily bread ration quickly became the lifeline for those fortunate enough to receive it. But even then, it was never enough. The city's inhabitants resorted to extreme measures to obtain food. People scavenged the streets, searching through rubble, abandoned buildings, and even garbage dumps in a desperate attempt to find something edible. In some cases, it wasn't just the food that was scarce, it was the fuel to cook it. People boiled shoes, leather straps, and anything else they could find to make soups and stews. But even then, it was far from a nutritious meal. It was instead a cruel parody of sustenance. What's even more chilling is the way the situation worsened as winter set in. The temperatures in Leningrad plummeted to unimaginable lows, often reaching minus 30 degrees Celsius or minus 22 degrees Fahrenheit or lower. The city's heating system, along with its water and gas supplies, was completely destroyed by the German bombardment. For the residents of Leningrad, survival meant battling not only hunger, but the relentless cold. People huddled together in what little warmth they could find, often sharing the most meager of blankets, as they tried to protect themselves from the freezing temperatures. In some cases, families slept with their coats on, using whatever they could find to keep the cold at bay. But with the scarcity of fuel, even a modest fire was a luxury. The lack of warmth was particularly devastating for the elderly and children. As the city's hospitals were overwhelmed with cases of malnutrition, frostbite, and disease, doctors and nurses fought an impossible battle to care for those who were suffering. They were limited not only by a lack of medical supplies, but also by the sheer number of people who needed help. The hospitals themselves were often cold and poorly equipped, with staff working tirelessly despite being malnourished and exhausted. Even in such dire conditions, the doctors never stopped trying to save lives. Their dedication was nothing short of heroic. Please take a moment to like and subscribe to our channel. In addition to the horrors of hunger and cold, Leningrad's residents also had to contend with the constant threat of air raids and artillery bombardments. The Nazis launched relentless attacks on the city, hoping to break the spirit of the people inside. They bombed civilian areas, targeting markets, residential buildings, and cultural landmarks. The damage was devastating, but the people of Leningrad refused to give in. They built makeshift shelters and took refuge in the underground metro system, where they huddled together in the dark to avoid the worst of the bombings. The sound of sirens became a constant reminder of the danger above, but it was not enough to shake the resolve of the people. One of the most remarkable aspects of the siege was the way the citizens of Leningrad organized themselves in the face of overwhelming adversity. Despite the devastation and chaos, the people of the city worked together to ensure that as many lives as possible were spared. Volunteers helped to distribute food rations, while others helped to organize the transport of supplies from the outside world. Women, children, and the elderly were mobilized to assist in the war effort, with many taking part in the production of munitions and other essential goods. Leningrad's factories, although under constant threat, continued to operate, and many people took pride in their work, understanding that every piece of ammunition, every weapon, and every bit of food could make the difference between life and death. The persistence of the people of Leningrad was epitomized in their cultural and spiritual endurance. Despite the immense suffering, the city's residents continued to celebrate their culture and traditions. Public performances, concerts, and even plays were still held, although often under incredibly difficult circumstances. Music, in particular, played a role in helping the people endure the siege. The Leningrad Symphony Orchestra, for example, performed in the city's concert halls in front of audiences who were starving and cold. In one particularly emotional instance, the orchestra performed Dmitri Shostakovich's Symphony No. 7, the Leningrad Symphony, a piece that would become a symbol of resistance and defiance against the Nazi invaders. The music, born out of suffering, provided a sense of unity and strength for the people, reminding them of their shared identity and determination to survive. As the months dragged on, the situation inside Leningrad became more and more desperate. Disease ran rampant, claiming countless lives. Typhus, dysentery, and other infectious diseases spread like wildfire, fueled by the lack of sanitation, overcrowding, and malnutrition. It was a terrifying prospect. Even if you survived the bombs, the cold, and the hunger, you might still fall victim to the diseases that were ravaging the city. Many children died from starvation and disease, and it's impossible to fathom the toll that this took on the families who lost loved ones. But despite the daily horror, there were moments of extraordinary heroism and solidarity. In the face of suffering, the human spirit proved to be unbreakable. People who had nothing shared with those who had even less. Soldiers, civilians, and doctors worked side by side to care for the wounded and keep the city's defenses intact. The city's workers, soldiers, and civilians, regardless of their circumstances, continued to resist, to fight, and to survive. By January 1943, after 2 years of suffering, the siege of Leningrad was finally broken. Soviet forces launched a successful offensive that pushed the Nazis back and allowed for the eventual liberation of the city. But the cost had been immeasurable. It's estimated that between 600,000 and 1.5 million people died during the siege, with the vast majority perishing from starvation, disease, or bombing raids. The city had been reduced to rubble, but its people had survived, holding fast to their determination even in the face of unspeakable horror. Today, the siege of Leningrad remains a poignant reminder of the depths of human suffering and the resilience of the human spirit. It is a story of survival in a frozen hell, where hunger, disease, and death were constant companions. But it is also a story of defiance, of people who refused to let their city fall, no matter the cost. The siege ended, but the memory of the sacrifices made during those 872 days lives on. The people of Leningrad endured, and through their suffering, they left an indelible mark on history. If you found this story of survival and resilience as moving as I did, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories from history. Thank you for watching, and remember, stay curious.